Hey, welcome. Today I am talking about what is the purpose of Holy Week. And this comes from, there was an in-person Bible study earlier today, and this is an opportunity to just kind of get a sense of, all right, so what is Holy Week? Maybe you've heard it. Maybe you're like, well, doesn't it have something to do with Easter? And Holy Week ends with Easter, but it begins on the previous Sunday with Palm Sunday. And I've talked before about, in terms of like what is Lent, that it is a preparation time. And so in the early church, they were celebrating Easter, and the period of 40 days of 6 weeks before Easter became a time of preparation. And Holy Week is like, okay, we're going to get really into the details of looking at kind of the final days of Jesus and what do we need to kind of pay attention to. And what's interesting is you can look at Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, all four gospels, and they're going to tell the story a little bit differently. And they're going to tell it from different perspectives. They're going to tell it because maybe they've got a little bit different information. They're going to tell it because they're also trying to show something or highlight something that's important to them. And so when we're looking through, just to keep that in mind of depending upon which gospel you're reading, you're going to get something a little bit different. And if we're looking at, all right, so Sunday is Palm Sunday or Passion Sunday, and we usually wave a lot of palms, which there are a lot of palms behind me, which we actually decorated the entire Lent with. This sense of Palm Sunday is about a celebration. In fact, Jesus is riding in on a donkey and the people are shouting Hosanna. They are saying, blessed is the King who comes in the name of the Lord. There's a sense of pure celebration of who Jesus is. And it's kind of interesting to hold that celebration intention with, we know what's going to happen in just a few days. And in a few days, there's going to be a crucifixion. And so on one side, there's this celebration, and on this other side, there's this real heaviness with it. And so that is the focus of Sunday. Well, on Monday, we get the focus of Jesus cleansing the temple. And it's kind of interesting because Matthew, Mark, and Luke all have this at the end of Jesus' life, before the crucifixion, but after the triumphal entry, whereas John actually has it at the beginning of Jesus' ministry because he's highlighting something a little bit different than the others. But here, with the cleansing of the temple, with Matthew, Mark, and Luke, there's a sense of recognizing there are a lot of problems in this world. And for Jesus and the cleansing of the temple, it's about some people are being taken advantage of, especially the poor. And he doesn't like that. He wants it to stop, of taking advantage of people who have less, who don't have much. And so he is highlighting like this needs to end. And so that is the focus of Monday. And then on Tuesday, because we really don't know what actually happened on the Tuesday before Jesus was crucified, that focus has become, through the years, of Jesus teaching in parables. And if we're looking at, say, the book of Matthew, the parables that are highlighted often are the ones that come after Jesus' triumphal entry, after the temple is cleansed. And so here are some more teachings of Jesus. And to think about parables, if you go read any of Jesus' parables, to recognize that they are like an onion, that there are multiple layers, and like you peel one back and you learn something new. They're also meant to really challenge us and go, I don't know if I believe that. I don't know if I'm okay with that. I don't act like that, do I? And I don't ever want to act like that. And so it's a matter of actually highlighting really, who do we want to be? Who is God? How are we supposed to act in this world? It's actually giving us a chance to really question that. And that every time we think we have a parable figured out, we learn something new, and we probably don't. And so they're kind of fun that way. They're also it's kind of like a riddle, and it can make your mind go, ow, it hurts. But they can be very helpful in understanding, all right, what is Jesus trying to get at with the things that we struggle with in this world, personally, as a community? How do we get through those times? How should we be acting or not acting? And so they really are helpful in questioning and giving us yet another aspect of Jesus' teachings in the world. And then on Wednesday, we get the chief priest conspiring. We get Judas is now plotting to betray Jesus. But in between those things, we get the anointing in Bethany. And as we're focused on, all right, there's a group of people who actually hate Jesus for healing other people. They hate that he helps other people, that he's an encouragement, and that they find it to be a threat to their own power. They're fearful of him. And so they are conspiring. And then Judas, for all of his reasons that we aren't totally aware of, he is going to betray Jesus to those who want to kill him. And so it's like this big pile of, oh, yuck. I mean, this is awful. And in between that is this anointing, where it is this woman who is recognizing who Jesus is as a healer, as a teacher, as one who brings love and encouragement, as one who forgives, who brings more forgiveness to the world. And so she is celebrating that in the midst of all these problems. And what's interesting to think about there is how often in our lives we hold in tension those things of there are some great moments and then there are some horrific moments, and recognizing that even in the midst of chaos and pain, that we can still find God's presence. We can still find God's goodness somewhere, somehow. We may just have to look more closely. And then to move from Wednesday, now we're getting more serious with Maundy, Thursday. And Maundy, Thursday is all about the Passover meal, which we find in Matthew, Mark, and Luke, and the foot washing in John. And that foot washing is where Jesus says, I give you a new commandment to love one another just as I have loved you, and that they will know that you are my disciples by your love. And so we get that aspect. But then with the Passover meal, with focusing on that part of looking at the last meal that Jesus has with his really close friends, that the Passover meal is all about celebrating God liberating the Israelites from Egypt, that they are now free, that there is redemption, that they are free to be God's people. And they celebrate thousands of years up to Jesus, and they continued to celebrate. The Jews continued to celebrate Passover, and to recognize how this is a moment of celebration. And at the same time, Jesus is having some really serious conversations in the midst of this meal, which it doesn't seem to be landing with them. Like they don't seem to be fully understanding, probably because there's the celebration and there is also this heaviness. And it brings to mind, like, growing up and going to the funeral home often, because it was a town where everybody knew everybody, and that there would be these moments where there's sadness and there's tears, but then there's also laughter, of holding those things in tension, because both can be true at the same time. And so for Jesus in this moment of really understanding how he is navigating this last meal of celebration, and yet knowing that things are about to get really complicated, really hard for all of them, that there's going to be a whole lot of pain ahead on this journey. And so that is what Maundy, Thursday is focused upon and trying to understand about those last moments of Jesus' life. And then Good Friday starts off with Gethsemane, which is in John, the book of John, referred to as a garden. We're not quite sure if it is. Makes sense if it is. That's where he goes to pray. And so he takes his disciples. He is off praying. He's struggling. It's actually, if we read in Matthew, he's anxious and sad. And so that's really kind of important to take note of. And that Jesus is, he's human. That he is, as he is fully divine, he is also fully human. And so he is going to go through all those emotions that we go through. And that from Gethsemane, we go to the arrest. And Judas shows up and the crowds, and they're threatening. And we get this really weird moment where one of the disciples pulls out a sword and cuts off the ear of one of the slaves of the high priest. And Jesus is like, no, put that away, especially in Matthew. Like, put that down. Those who live by the sword die by the sword. And then he goes on to say, I can choose violence, but I don't. And so to recognize just the tension building of this situation, and that Jesus is going to continue to be who he is no matter what's going on. And as we go through, he is then arrested, and then he is taken before the council. And the council, they've been after him. They feel threatened by him. They are jealous of him. And so they're looking for a reason to charge him with blasphemy. And blasphemy, the meaning of that has evolved over the years. And here it seems to be insulting God. Blasphemy also could mean elevating oneself to God, or it could some even considered saying the name of God to be blasphemous. Whatever it was, they are trying to get him to commit it, and he won't. He just will not do it. And so they get really frustrated with him. And then the scene cuts away from his time in the council to Peter denying him. So people around outside of this meeting of the council, they're like, hey, dude, like, we know you. And Peter's like, nope, no, I don't know that guy. I don't know Jesus. I'm not one of his followers. And the rooster crows 3 times, and it's like an awakening for Peter. And Peter goes and sobs uncontrollably. Peter is like, what have I done? And this is a moment to recognize forgiveness and love, that God's forgiveness and love is forever. It is the constant. It is always there. And it's that recognition that if we just make a little bit of space for it, we might actually get to realize it. And Peter will realize it. As he cries uncontrollably, those tears give space for him to experience God's love and God's forgiveness. And then from there, because the council can't actually kill Jesus, they do not have that power. That is only in the power of Rome. And so they take Jesus to Pilate, who is the governor of the time of that region, who has all of the authority of life and death. Rome seems to think it is God, that it has the power of life and death. And with Rome, they don't really care who you worship. They just want you to be peaceful and not challenge their power. And so even Pilate, he's like questioning Jesus, and he's like, this guy's innocent. I don't think he's done anything. Like, I need to let him go. And the people around are like, no, crucify him. And this moment of going, oh my goodness, like, what self-righteousness, anger, hatred has been cultivated to go to that extreme, even as Pilate's like, no, he's innocent. And Pilate doesn't want to be responsible for any of this. In fact, if we read in Matthew, it says Pilate washed his hands of it and is like, not on me, it's on you. And they're like, oh yeah, no, it's on us, because they're so self-righteous about it. But to recognize also that Pilate shirks his responsibility. Pilate could tell everybody to go home, but he doesn't. Pilate has his own fears that seem to be getting in the way. And so on this Good Friday of recognizing how much good is lacking in others, how much good is in Jesus, and how much good is lacking in the world around. And then because Pilate can't convince them, and he doesn't want to make the hard decision and go, everybody go home. Instead, Pilate's like, okay, well, I guess we have to crucify him. And so then Jesus is handed over and tortured. And the crucifixion, which is on a cross, which was a method by the Romans to kill people, besides the Colosseum with the lions, that it was a slow, painful, torturous death. And to recognize that Jesus is in pain physically and mentally. There's a feeling of abandonment in Matthew. Again, all 4 Gospels tell this differently. And I think it's really important to actually take note of those, to read through them and go, that's an interesting way to talk about, or that's an interesting piece of information. And what does that tell me about who Jesus is, even in really dire moments? And of recognizing that Jesus goes through everything that we go through, all the ups, downs, no matter how horrific life is, God gets it. Jesus gets it. Jesus is with us in all of that. And then with the crucifixion, there is death. And so Jesus dies. And the recognition there of just what has been lost in all of that good that he has done. And it seems that death has triumphed. And then we get to Holy Saturday, which for some is a time of prayer, a time of meditation. Sometimes there are services by churches. And it's kind of this sense of this feeling of where is God in all of this, in the worst of things. But then we have Easter. And Easter is this moment that love cannot die. And so when we're thinking through that, of looking at Holy Week and paying really close attention to everything, even the very painful parts of it, of going, and yet there is still love and there is still forgiveness, that the resurrection is about that love cannot die. And we understand how big and important that is. And with looking at Holy Week, it's to help us understand that. It's to help give us that sense of, all right, what is happening here? And so I hope that's been helpful about what is the purpose of Holy Week? How do we understand it? What do we look at? In the description, in the comments, wherever you're going to watch this, I have put links, or I have put the different scriptures that you can go to, whichever book it's in. So I recommend reading it, taking a look at it, and then asking a whole lot of questions of, all right, what is this trying to teach? What is the purpose of this? How is this pointing me towards God's love? So I hope you find that helpful. May your day be blessed, and may you constantly know God's love in your life. Have a good one.